Morning. I was watching a video yesterday by a YouTube user called Boris. He's only got a couple of views and I don't think any subscribers, but he made a video called Beautiful Dog Crap Art, which came up on my related videos thing, so I had a look at that. It's a young chap who's talking about art, and he showed some pictures that he'd drawn and some and talked about some ideas he had, and one of the things he was talking about was about an experience he had with his art tutor, I guess at college, something like that, at school, and he was saying that, you know, that perennial question had come up, what is art? And the guy who was talking to had made that response, which I've used myself at times. I've certainly said this, which is, you know, anything is art. Everything around you is art, which is a really frustrating thing to say and to hear, I know. And I come back to it in my own mind quite a bit and think about it. So I thought I'd just try to think through on camera what I think that means and what I'm trying to suggest when I use something like that. I mean, I don't actually work in visual art. I work in theatre. I teach in the theatre department in a UK university, and so my background and my information is about theatre and performance. It's not a particularly conventional theatre department, and my interests are a bit wider than that, but nevertheless it's that end of the arts that I have most kind of professional purchase on. But this question comes up again, you know, in that context, what is theatre? And again I find, what is performance? And I find myself saying everything around you can be performance. So I just want to, as I say, think into that and then see that and refer it back to art and then refer it back to what Boris was talking about. Because I was talking about this to some students recently actually, and I was referring to the introduction to a book by a writer called Philip Auslander, who writes a lot about performance and about music actually, and about popular music particularly. He's really good on glam rock actually. But he had this book recently called something like, oh god, Theory for Performance Studies, I can't remember what it's called actually, sorry, I'll find it, put it in the description box. But it's a collection of essays about theorists, about people who've written theoretical, who produce theoretical ideas which might be used in the analysis and the understanding of, in that case, performance work. But in terms of what I'm talking about, he makes this really interesting distinction at the beginning of that book between what he calls performance studies and theatre studies. And that's the bit that I was talking to my students about, the distinction that Auslander is making. And that's a distinction which I think is relevant to this conversation. I mean, we don't need to worry about the terms, but he makes these distinctions between, as I say, theatre studies and performance studies. And he says theatre studies is object-driven, whereas performance studies, he says, is paradigm-driven. So let's just see if I can explain what I think he means by that. He says, when he says theatre studies is object-driven, he means that there's a collection of what you might call objects out there in the world, events, performances, shows, plays, play texts, scripts, casts of characters, individual characters, actors, directors, dramateurs, scenographers, the whole history of kind of theatre and performance that's out there in the world and which is constantly being produced and which is, you know, being shown in theatres and produced by publishers and so on. There's all these objects, and so theatre studies is the study of those objects in pretty much the same way that, I don't know, marine biology is the study of shellfish and stars and seaweed and all that kind of stuff. There's a collection of things that live in a marine environment, so marine biology is the study of those things. So theatre studies recognises that there's a theatre environment, and theatre studies is the study of those things. Yeah, it's object driven. Now Auslander contrasts that with what, as I said, he calls a paradigm driven understanding, which he uses the term performance studies, doesn't really matter what the term is. And he says under the paradigm driven understanding, you take the idea of performance, or theatre, you take the idea of performance and then you apply it to an understanding of the world. He said, at least as we do this all the time, but I think he's right. So you take performance as one of the key paradigms for understanding the world and you apply it to all the things around you. So anything can be looked at as if it's a performance. That's the idea. And it's been very successful. I mean, the performance, what's sometimes called the performative turn in language, is reflective of that. That's a kind of a developing understanding of how can we understand and talk about language? One of the influences on that has been this performance understanding, looking at language as a series of what John Searle, the philosopher, calls speech acts. Ultimately, it comes out of another theorist called Austin, who talks about the way that language performs, and performative language, as he calls it. And that's been developed so that a lot of the contemporary theories about language and the way that language works and the way that the speech is working right now, and hopefully some of your understanding is working. Sorry, I just had a little break there because my camera ran out of film. Yeah, so we understand one another through as a kind of performance. We're performing the utterances that are coming out of our mouths. That's a bit obscure, I know, but other examples might be something like Irving Goffman, who's a sociologist. He wrote extensively, not recently, but some years ago, he wrote extensively on social interaction, people coming together and exchanging ideas and talking together as performances. That's the performance of self in everyday life he talks about. And a lot of the language that he uses in that, the extended sets of metaphors and analogies and just the analytical frame itself, is all about performance. That's what he uses. You also find it in people like Bernard Baars, the neuroscientist, who talks about the global workspace theory of how consciousness works. There's a lot of performance paradigm work going on in that, and sometimes overt theatre metaphors. And you even find it a little bit in Daniel Dennett's stuff when he talks about Cartesian theatre of the mind. It's less so in that. It's not a fully developed paradigm, but it's certainly a very extended set of metaphors that he deploys in order to be able to talk about, understand and communicate his ideas about mind and consciousness. You also find it in people like Judith Butler, performative gender. You know, it's contested, but it's really interesting stuff. In some of her ideas, she talks about, you know, gender, the fact that, you know, not biological sex, or not exactly biological sex, but gender, the display that we put on to demonstrate that we're male or demonstrate we're female. She talks about as a performance. There isn't ultimately an essential gender that we walk into. We learn the role, we learn the character, and we kind of perform that throughout our lives completely naturally. She's not suggesting it's fake. She's just saying that the gender itself is best understood as a performance. So that's another example of the performance paradigm. So to return to Auslander, what he's saying there is that performance studies, in his term, is the recognition that performance is an analytical framework, a paradigm, a way of looking at the world. And once you have a way of looking at the world, you can look at anything as a performance. I can look at this cup as a performance if I choose to. And in fact, you know, we talk about cars performing, don't we? The performance paradigm is widely applied to machinery and to corporations and all kinds of things. So that's certainly the case with performance. And just to return to Boris's video, your video there, Boris, I'm directing to yourself. I wouldn't want to put words into the guy's mouth, but that may be what your tutor was talking about, where he's saying that everything around you is art. It's again, there's two ways of looking at art, isn't there? In the same way there's two ways of looking at performance. You can look at art as a collection of objects. No, sorry, excuse me, just one sec. I've been messing about with little objects myself. I'm not sure if I call them art, but I don't know what else you'd call them. So we could look around at the collection of objects that have been called art in the past, and which populate our galleries and our museums, and which fill the pages of our art journals, and which professional artists spend their time making, and which art critics and art tutors spend their time talking about. We could look at those objects, and that's what art is, you know, and that's the object of some kind of art study program. Or we can look at art as a paradigm, in which case it's a way of looking at the world, you know, a way of characterizing our experience, a way of understanding the world around us. We can look at the world through the eyes of an understanding about that realizes itself as art. You know what I mean? So we can look at things as if they are art. So that's a bit different. That's completely different. So I'm guessing that's what he's getting at. I mean, one of the things I think is quite important there is that, particularly when I'm using phrases like "as if," you know, look at the world as if it's a performance. Look at the world as if it's art. It's the crucial thing there is that you're not replacing a real way of looking at the world with some fake way of looking at it. You know, to return to performance for a second, when Erving Goffman talks about social interactions, people coming together, talking, exchanging, when he talks about those interactions as performances and uses extended kind of theatre and performance metaphors to describe them, it's not that he's erasing the reality of that situation. There isn't a real way of talking about that situation. I mean, you can describe it, but there isn't a real analysis of that. There's only analytical frames to talk about it. There's only ways of understanding it. There's only ways of seeing it. Yeah. So you have to, and so however you look at it, you're adopting a way of seeing anyway. You're adopting a way of analysing and understanding it. So, and performance is one of those. Neither perhaps better in some ways, perhaps worse in some ways, and other ways of understanding it. And the same thing is true of the art thing. You know what I mean? Looking at the world as using the paradigm of art doesn't erase anything of the world as it is. It's just an alternative to other ways of looking at the world. Neither of which are more real than any other. Anyhow, I hope that makes some kind of sense. And yeah, that'll be. Thanks very much. Bye.